ability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hi, this is Dick Shanley, and for the next hour I will be reading from Sunday, June 7th issue of the New York Times Opinion section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. First article is written by Nicholas Kristof. Where life is better. A quiz question: which state does best at ensuring the well-being of its citizens, giving them health, education, and hope? It's one of the richest places per capita to live, which, depending on what you count, include Connecticut, New York, and Washington, D.C. It's not the world's tech capital, California, nor is it proud and flamboyant Texas. Florida may attract retirees, but it's not Florida either. Rather, a major new study finds that the number one state in terms of residents' quality of life is Minnesota. Yes, just a bit boring Minnesota. Freezing Minnesota. Calm, pragmatic, not very ideological Minnesota. The new study comes from the State of the Nation Project, backed by a bipartisan group of experts. This year's assessment is based on 31 members and was created by scholars and by advisors to the last 5 presidents, including Donald Trump. The bad news is that every part of the country, even Minnesota, is seeing a decline in self-reported personal well-being and mental health. Likewise, people throughout the country trust less institutions and in their fellow Americans. Overall, we increasingly are unhappy. We have a national problem on our hands, says Douglas Harris, a Tulane University economist who is leading the State of the Nation Project. Minnesota may be a model state, but even it is tracking the downward national trends in areas like mental health, children, and families be noted. It's a very uniform, broad-based decline in well-being, Harris said. There really aren't any states knocking it out of the park on how people feel about their lives, other people, or key institutions. To me, the discontent seems a reason to mark a nation's 250th birthday next month with a fact-based effort to diagnose what has gone wrong, and that something the State of the Nation Project may help with. The 10 states in well-being in the study in order are Minnesota, New Hampshire, Iowa, Vermont, Massachusetts, Nebraska, South Dakota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, and Utah. California and New York rank in the middle. Florida and Texas are a bit below average. Louisiana is at the bottom, with New Mexico, West Virginia, Nevada, Mississippi, Alabama, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Arkansas, and South Carolina not much better off. In general, the states doing well tend to be in New England or the western part of the Midwest and are somewhat prosperous. The worst performers tend to be red states in the South, but the patterns aren't clear-cut. And let's acknowledge that this is a single study, relying on data that are sometimes subjective. Still, I think it helps when Republicans and Democrat experts agree on where we are. These lessons seem paramount to me. America does an excellent job generating wealth and a poor job translating that wealth into things we value. For example, the State of the Nation Project says the United States performs better than 98% of countries worldwide in economic output, but better than only 50% of nations in child mortality, 33% in belief in democracy, and 11% in measures of depression and anxiety. Domestically, rich states tend to outperform poor states, but the correlation is somewhat weak. What matters even more than economic growth is that benefits are shared, and richer states do not seem to produce more richer personal satisfaction. Social spending, especially on education, improves citizens' outcome. But what matters in addition to the sums themselves is how the money is spent. Minnesota ranks 13th among states in the share of personal income going to state and local taxes for the tax policy, but it seems to get a high return on its spending. Southern states do poorly, but some of the most progressive states also underperform, especially given how wealthy they are. Politicians in some liberal states seem better at reciting slogans, "Housing is a human right," than at actually building housing. Instead of spurring action, the slogans sometimes substitute for it. I've argued that the states doing the most to lift education outcomes are three red states better known for their past failures in social policy: Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi. These ratings are a reminder that matters to residents is less boldness of the vision than relentless empiricism and careful execution. As I explored the data, I wondered if there's something to be said for a healthy opposition party. The pattern is imperfect, but many of the worst performers are on one-party Republican states, while the unperforming rich states are mostly dominated by Democrats. A few of the best performers, including Minnesota, have a blue cast, but with enough Republicans to keep Democrats nervous. Looking at these results, I also have a nagging fear. Decline can become self-fulfilling. The study underscores increasing economic frustration and distrust of government, and these realities may help explain the rise of Trump. And now he's giving people even more reason to distrust government. Here is my hope. We rigorously reflect on where we stand on our 205th birthday and aim in a calm, underrated Minnesota way to tackle our challenge, and as Lincoln put it, to bind up the nation's wounds. This article is written by Jamel Bowie. What would Lincoln do? The Heritage Foundation's mandate for leadership, the Conservative Promise, properly known as Project 2025, was much more than a wish list of conservative policy preference. It was much more, even than a blueprint for a second-term administration. Project 25 was, above all, a statement of values and a theory of governance. Its authors did not simply want to move national policy making to the right. They wanted to use the authority of the executive branch to impose a new regime on the United States. I guess in layman's terms, an editorial comment, Project 25 was stated for regime change. We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, declared Kevin Roberts, president of Heritage, the summer before the 2024 election. Much of the disruption and destruction of the past year and change is downstream of the revolutionary orientation of Roberts and the alumni of Project 25 who have taken up places in and around Trump administration. Any plausible response to Project 25 must include a larger vision for the future of the American Republic. A Project 2029 cannot be a collection of Democratic Party agenda items. It must articulate a broad new conception of the nation's political order, one that will guide the way a future Democratic-led government might yield power. As it happens, several Democratic groups are drafting the equivalent of a Project 2029, and so far, unfortunately, it is not the Reconstruction agenda the country needs. It is instead just another Democratic Party policy document, a grab bag of ideas stitched together with the usual slogans and gestures toward economic populism. It is not that these policies are bad. Most of them, from which has been revealed, are good. Worthwhile plans to break up utility monopolies, support child rearing, regulate social media and artificial intelligence, and curtail corporate abuse. But none of this reflects or represents a far-reaching or comprehensive ideas of what the nation might be. There is no coherent world view at work, nor does there seem to be any inkling of awareness of the obstacles that will confront and likely stymie but all the most threadbare and ineffectual democratic agencies for governing. A Project 29 that has nothing to say about the Senate filibuster, an ideologically captured Supreme Court, or extreme partisan gerrymandering is not a Project 29 worth the time or effort. The same is true for Project 29 that fails to speak to questions of constitutional authority. Democrats need a theory of constitutional power, a sense of what the Constitution is and how it both authorizes and legitimizes the kind of government they hope to build. For Trump, aligned conservatives, the Constitution is unlimited grant of executive authority in which sovereignty lies with the president, who is more Bonapartist tribune than Madisonian chief magistrate. Their America Republic is not one led by and for governing individuals, but one directed from above by an executive who claims to stand as a living embodiment of the national spirit. An editorial comment: in my mind, we're talking they want to be king. During Reconstruction after the Civil War, Republicans worked to refound the nation as a democratic and egalitarian republic that embodied the values of the Declaration of Independence. It was in this view that led Republicans, radical and otherwise, to write their aspirations toward freedom and political equality of the Constitution through the 14th and 15th Amendments. It also shaped how they responded to President Andrew Johnson and the hostile Supreme Court justice, who tried to trim and overhaul their vision. They did not just override Johnson's vetoes, they impeached him. And they did not just criticize the court that took steps to tie its hands, limit its power, and strip its jurisdiction. As they look ahead to 2029 and beyond, Democrats need that kind of vision. They need, in particular, a commitment to a constitutional order centered on the power of the prerogatives of Congress. And they need to begin its work through the details of what this will mean in policy and in law. It is this work that will shape how Democrats approach the major concerns of the post-trauma moment. The state of the federal insurance, the scope of executive power, and the problem of judicial supremacy over the political system is an ambitious yes, but so was Project 2025. Broken eggs cannot be mended, Lincoln observed in a reply to August Belmont, a leading Democratic Party organizer and financier in New York, who had forwarded the president the comments of an angry Louisiana slaveowner who wanted the restoration of the Union as it was. Not much later, Lincoln repurposed the quip in different form. Broken eggs can never be mended, he wrote, in reference to the fate of slavery as the war carried on. And the longer the breaking proceeds, the more will be broken. The American people broke something when they gave Trump a second chance in office, and there is no going back to the Union as it was. If Democrats hope to lead the nation to any kind of recovery, much less renewal, they must understand and internalize the fact of the matter. Broken eggs cannot be mended. To try to return to some notion normally is to court failure. Worse, it is to play repeat of the last Democratic administration, when in pursuit of the familiar, the Democratic Party all but passed the baton back to the reactionaries working toward something revolutionary. The next article is written by Maureen Dowd. Norma Jean's still got it. I'm excited about the big birthday celebration, not the crass party that President Trump is having for America's 205th, with a solipsistic rally starring Trump, and now most of the celebrities have dropped out. This is a word I think we read last week. I should have looked up the meaning. It's spelled SOLIPISTIC, solipsistic. For his 80th birthday, he has funneled millions meant for the bipartisan celebration of this remarkable country to a partisan celebration of his contemptible self. L'État, c'est moi. It is I. No, I'm excited about Marilyn Monroe's Centennial Bash, which has been playing outside the globe from a prestigious exhibition at Paris Film Museum, Scène de Fascination, to a show at the National Portrait Gallery in London, to a concert in Japan, to a display of costumes and personal artifacts at the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures in L.A., to a joyous look contest with straights, gays, young, old, and even bearded Maryland in Palm Springs. Home to Forever Maryland, the 26-foot-tall, 34,000-pound statue of America's icon of icons in her white halter pleated blowy dress from the 7-Year Itch. The smart dumb blondes who sang the most notorious happy birthday of all time to President Kennedy, the only public erotic event in American presidential history, is getting a very happy birthday indeed. Norma Fear Joy Morton, who survived a mentally ill mom, a dad who deserted her, 12 foster homes, and some sexually abusive foster parents, a mudslide of sexual predation in Hollywood, very famous husbands who were peevish and jealous at her fame, and insensitive Kennedy brothers in getting the love she always created. Starting in 1948, Castroville, California, Artichoke Queen, Norma Jean created Marilyn, putting a high glass over her deep wounds. Marilyn, like a veil, I wear over Norma Jean, the actress once said. Some of her foster parents sent her to the movies to get her out of the house, and the little kid sat in front of the big screen and dreamed about a life where she was wanted. Like her character in Some Like It Hot, Sugarcane Kowalczyk, Marilyn often got the fuzzy end of the lollipop. She loved the camera and was scared of it, hence the bouts of lateness. She loved the public and was scared of it. Mike Nichols, who went to Lee Strasberg acting class in New York with Marilyn, once explained her astonishing staying power to me by saying, "She had the greatest need." Her strange combination of luminosity and vulnerability made her immortal. Unlike today's sex symbols, Marilyn thought it was cool to be smart. She collected over 400 classic books, from Thomas Mann to the work of Freud, and befriended intellectuals, even marrying one. Arthur Miller described the voluptuous yet fragile woman he would as a poet on a street corner, trying to recite to a crowd, pulling at her clothes. When Miller left out his journal open to a page saying that she embarrassed him in front of his intellectual peers, and Marilyn read it, she wrote, "I guess I have always been deeply terrified to really be someone's wife, since I know from life one cannot love another, ever, really." Like everyone else, Miller was mesmerized by his wife's power of enchantment. Glamour is a bird that for dark and largely unknowing reasons decides to light on his branch rather than another, he once wrote. In a world that increasingly lacks artists and politicians who burn through the screen with younger generations, has interest in off-screen lust, Marilyn remains as effulgent and seductive as ever. The company that managed her estate reported making $80 million from merchandising her name and image in a year. TJ Maxx sells Marilyn Monroe underwear. So why has she persisted as the most shimmery sex symbol all around the world? In one of the poems she described in her notebook, Marilyn described herself as strong as a cobweb in the wind. Marilyn was one of the kind embodying our deep fantasies. The woman was more interesting than the myth. As Sam Weston, the author of several best-selling books about Hollywood, put it, she is the American dream in darkness and in light. Her rise story comforts us to think dreams can come true, and her decline story comforts us that maybe we're better off. If our dreams don't come true, from better off and our dreams don't come true, from the feminist angle, she is equally versatile. She can be seen as a defiant victim of exploitation, an artist, or an object. Even when she made Billy Wilde, who directed her in 7-Year Itch and Some Like It Hot, wait while she cowered in her dressing room or blew a line 80 straight times, he forgave her. As I've said before, I've got an old haunt in Vienna who would say every line perfectly. Wilder told Cameron Crowe, laughing, but who would see such a picture? As Marilyn herself noted, glamour cannot be manufactured. It's magic. Fame isn't everything, she told Life editor Richard Merriman in her last interview in 1962. It warms you up a bit, but that warming is temporary. That should bring back some memories. An article about Marilyn Monroe. Florida centrist, MAGA warrior, shapeshifter, president. The secret to Marco Rubio's success. Nine days before Christmas in 1987, federal drug agents descended on a modest one property in West Miami. Their target was a drug dealer named Orlando Cecilia, whom they arrested and charged with selling and distributing millions of dollars of Colombian cocaine. The raid against Mr. Cecilia and his associates would prove to be one of the biggest drug busts in Florida history. In retrospect, it was notable for one other fact. Mr. Cecilia, it's Cicilla, Cecilia, was Marco Rubio's brother-in-law. Oh. Some of Mr. Rubio's most vivid early experience took place in the house where Mr. Cecilia was arrested. Mr. Rubio's fondest childhood memory was of a Christmas Eve party where Mr. Cecilia toasted a pig in a pit, covered with palm fronds in the yard of the house, according to Mr. Rubio's memoir. Later, when Mr. Rubio wanted to buy season tickets to Miami Dolphins games, he earned money by washing his brother-in-law's and sister-in-law's dogs in the yard. He even lived in the house briefly while his parents were moving across the country. Mr. Rubio has come a long way in the 4 decades since, rising to the role of global vanquisher of drug cartels and America's first enforcer as President Trump's Secretary of State. Mr. Trump tapped Mr. Rubio to run Venezuela after the military operation to seize the dictator Nicolas Maduro and bring him to the United States on drug trafficking. Mr. Rubio has said little over the years about his brother-in-law's arrest beyond noting the shock and heartbreak it caused his family. The contrast between Mr. Rubio's childhood relationship with a man who was later convicted of drug dealing and his current globetrotting role might seem like one of those random biographical quirks that are more common in fiction than in real life. Yet understand Mr. Rubio has always required reconciling such conflicting stories lines. As a Florida legislator, he communed with migrant laborers and backed tuition discounts for children of undocumented immigrants. Then became an immigration hardliner when he ran for the United States Senate. Then morphed again into a bipartisan immigration reformer in Congress. The contradictions have only mounted Mr. Rubio's later-day alliance with Donald Trump, and not just in the issue of immigration. Mr. Rubio has shifted from an impassioned champion of U.S. foreign aid to one of the dismantler of the United States Agency for International Development. He has gone from piquant advisor of the president's first-term foreign policy to an enabler of legally disputed strikes on alleged drug trafficking boats, and a cheerleader for the president's hegemonic approach to the Western Hemisphere. Having lambasted President Barack Obama's 2015 deal to ease sanctions on Iran in exchange for limits on nuclear program, Mr. Rubio is now among the loudest supporters of a similar agreement that Mr. Trump hopes will end the war there. Mr. Rubio's gymnastics have made him an increasingly successful ally of the president and increasingly puzzling to those who thought he would be moderating less MAGA-ish force within Troops 2.0. Yet, his shape-shifting is not a new phenomenon. As a defining characteristic, a close look at Mr. Rubio reveals the consistent truth about him. Marco Rubio has always found a way to belong. In his Venezuela ascendancy and through his navigation of the failures of the Iran War, he has managed to deepen his relationship with Mr. Trump and cement his membership in good standing in the political movement the president created. He has seemed just fine with going on television to defend Mr. Trump's war of choice in Iran, when others, including his main rival to be Mr. Trump's heir apparent, Vice President J.D. Vance, occupy more prominent public roles in negotiations to end the conflict. And when he was playing high school football, Mr. Rubio seems delighted to be on the team, even if he's not a star player. That's not to say that Mr. Rubio won't get his chances for glory. Mr. Trump frequently mentioned him as the man who will bring Cuba into line with the president's goal of regional domination. As the Iran war lumbers to an inclusive end, that hemispheric goal in returning to Mr. Trump's attention. On May 22nd, the Justice Department indicted the country's former president, Raul Castro, and a Trump-imposed oil blockade has yet off an economic crisis on the island. Mr. Rubio, for his past, has offered the country $100 million in aid via the Catholic Church or independent charities. At some point, it seems as if Mr. Rubio's pileup of contradictions will have to catch up with him. Yet, over the 2 decades I have observed him, including writing a 2015 biography, Mr. Rubio's paradoxes haven't been a liability. If anything, they've been an asset, at least from a political perspective. Few are better at reading the American room, which means Americans have a real interest in Mr. Rubio's serial metamorphosis, not just because he is currently both Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, but because he clearly still harbors ambitions of becoming president himself one day. Born in Miami in 1971, Mr. Rubio spent hours at the side of his beloved grandfather, Pedro Victor Garcia, listening to the family stories in many ways. They were familiar tales of an immigrant family new to America. Mr. Garcia had come to the United States in 1956 from Cuba in search of a better life. In 1962, after an extended stay abroad, an American immigration judge ruled that Mr. Garcia had relinquished his legal residency status. The judge ordered Mr. Garcia deported, according to a recording of the proceeding. The order was issued shortly before the Cuban Missile Crisis threw relations between the countries into chaos. However, Mr. Garcia ended up staying in the United States for good. In the ensuing years, the American dream did not come easily to the Rubio family. Mr. Rubio's dad, who had arrived in the United States in 1956, before the start of the Cuban Revolution, struggled to earn a living, tending bar and managing a residential building near Miami's airport. They did find community and religion. The Rubios belonged to a neighborhood Catholic church in Coral State, west of Little Havana. The young Rubio delighted in dress up like a priest after Mass. I had a habit as a child of play acting scenes from experience that had made an impression on me, Mr. Rubio wrote in his memoir. In 1979, when he was 8, the family left behind in Miami, roiling with drug cartel violence, and moved to Las Vegas, where an aunt of his would factor heavily into his life. The aunt was Mormon, so were the boys who lived next door. Marco wanted to be Mormon too. To entertain himself and his family, he would lip-sync the songs of the Mormon TV star Donnie and Marie Esmond. Soon enough, he and his mom were baptized in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The conversion was short-lived. In 1984, the family moved back to Florida, and by the time Mr. Rubio was in high school, his family had followed him back to Catholicism. They embraced the intense and ever-present anti-Castro, Cuban exile atmosphere in Miami that would become an abiding hallmark of Mr. Rubio's political identity. Ascending from his days as a 20-something member of a suburban Miami City Commission, or became the first Cuban-American Speaker of the Florida House. Mr. Rubio was propelled in part by the power of his story he recounted about his family. He told the Cuban Americans was among the audience for his speeches that he was one of them, a son of the exiles, whose parents were forced to leave Cuba by Fidel Castro. It was a story that turned out to be inaccurate. While researching my biography on Mr. Rubio, I came upon a document that proved his parents and older brother had arrived in the U.S. before the Cuban Revolution, nearly 3 years before Castro took power, around the same time as Mr. Rubio's granddad. In fact, his grandfather had returned to Cuba after Castro's ascent and taken a menial transportation job in the government. When I wrote an article about the discrepancy for the Washington Post, where I was reporter at the time, Mr. Rubio said he had relied on the oral history of his family, and that was what his parents had told him. He denied purposefully telling an inaccurate story for political gain. He said his parents should be considered exiles because they wanted to return to Cuba but couldn't. It was a fair point, even if it didn't exactly clean up the story he'd been telling. Soon enough, Mr. Rubio would face uglier challenges to his family history. When Mr. Rubio was a Republican vice presidential contender, 2012, a theory began circulating he was not a natural-born citizen. The argument went that his parents, though they were legal in the U.S., were not U.S. citizens when he was born, and that he would therefore not be eligible to become president someday. It was a bogus attack because he was born in the United States. Mr. Rubio has been a lifelong citizen. But in 2016, while running for president, that storyline resurfaced in a court case. As the New York Times' Adam Liptak reported that year, Mr. Rubio felt compelled to file papers in which he made a full-throated defense birthright citizenship. As one of the first acts of his second term, Mr. Trump issued an executive order greatly expanding the categories of people born in the U.S. who would not be eligible for birthright citizenship. The order had been stalled by court challenge and an argument before the Supreme Court in April. Mr. Trump's case seemed headed for defeat. Whatever the result, Mr. Rubio and his family would not be affected. Mr. Rubio has embraced Mr. Trump's move. Despite all the contradictions, Mr. Rubio has cemented his membership into Mr. Trump's MAGA movement. He has flipped from ardent support for Ukraine to an inclination to make concessions to the Russian strongman Putin. He has abandoned his longtime support for the work of USAID and now instead presiding over its death. Some of Mr. Rubio's changes cut particularly close to home. His hard line on punishment for drug offenders contrasts with the leniency he once showed his former drug dealer brother-in-law, according to documents I unearthed. When Mr. Rubio was the majority whip in the Florida House of Representatives, he used his official stationery to recommend to the Florida Division of Real Estate, who had recently been released from prison, should be granted a real estate license. That was the real estate of Mr. Cilia. The recommendation letter didn't mention his personal relation to Mr. Cilia. At the time, Mr. Rubio dismissed suggestions that he did anything unethical. Mr. Rubio is one of the few politicians who have survived crossing swords with Mr. Trump. So far, Mr. Trump won't be president forever. Mr. Rubio's relationship with him and the movement he created is something the Secretary of State will never be able to hide. Together, they have embarked on building a world order that will be difficult, if not impossible, to undo. A God-it-alone interventionist America that takes what it wants from Venezuela to Iran, now Cuba. Mr. Rubio is along for Mr. Trump's disruptive ride. What if it all goes wrong? I can't imagine Mr. Rubio's nimbly rising from the ashes just as he did when Mr. Trump humiliated him in the home state, Florida, by trouncing him in the 2016 presidential primary. I have no idea Mr. Rubio is simultaneously relishing and feeling conflicted when he once again trying on a new persona, a Trumpian MAGA role that he might one day need to abandon. The now famous photograph of him on the Oval Office sofa, watching Mr. Trump berate Ukraine's Zelensky, have become memes for good reasons, capturing both his tough gay frown and his discomfort as he shrank into the pillows. Yet, says a lot about Mr. Rubio's skills and in a small group and shape-shifting survivors close to Mr. Trump. The Secretary of State is emerging as a top contender in the race to succeed him. This new iteration of Mr. Rubio is angrier and more sullen than the often sunny politician who became the charming and precocious darling of the Republican Party in the 2010s. His tone has become strident, his words more biting. For now, at least, he's something, a clear message to the MAGA world that he is one of them and will be a fitting heir. Editorial comment. It's kind of interesting. In the 2028 election, perhaps Mr. Rubio and Mr. Vance will be arguing between them for the presidency. Next article was written by a columnist called Lydia Palgren. Lebanon is fed up and ready to make itself. Fresh from his evening shower May 15th, Ibram Nem was setting into the couch to watch the news in a quiet neighborhood in Tyre, an ancient city in southern Lebanon. There was a lot to catch up on. A Lebanese delegation had just met with Israeli officials in Washington, part of the first direct negotiations between the two countries in decades. In theory, the talks had been positive. The two sides had agreed to meet again in June and to extend the month-old ceasefire between them for 45 days. But just as they turned in, they heard a crackle of nearby gunfire. I started hearing people shouting and screaming and people shooting in the air, Nem told me. The shooting could mean only one thing: an Israeli strike was coming. He grabbed his shoes, his teenage daughter, and their cat and hurtled down the stairs. Minutes later, a missile crashed into the building next door. The blast sheared off the wall of the room Noam had been sitting in. The sofa tumbled onto the ash debris 5 stories below. Shards of glass blanketed the twin beds in his daughter's bedrooms, and deep fissures snaked up the apartment's exterior walls. He and his family had no idea why this placid, upscale neighborhood and of elegant apartment blocks was bombed. It was a tight-knit community where everybody knew everyone, and the notion of Hezbollah fighters being among them was absurd. We are civilians, an architect told me the next afternoon as he surveyed the damage to his home of 25 years, where he and his wife had raised 4 daughters. Why attack us? Like Nem and his tumbling sofa, Lebanon has found itself on the wreckage of an epic battle not of its own making. Hezbollah, the Iran-backed Shiite militia group, has been in conflict with Israel on and off for decades. After it fired rockets into Jerusalem in March as vengeance for the killing of Iran's supreme leader, Israeli launched a brutal counterattack, killing almost 3,500 people and wounding more than 10,000, according to Lebanon's health ministry. Let me repeat that. The strikes in Lebanon, and they're not part of Hezbollah, killed 3,500 people and displaced 10,000. There's a ceasefire in place, but also a war on Israel regularly bombs residential areas it claims harbor Hezbollah militants. And Hezbollah attacks Israel troops who occupy an ever-expanding swath of Lebanese territory. Last month, Israel widened the ground assault and pushed deeper into Lebanon. On Monday, Benjamin Netanyahu ordered strikes in the Beirut suburbs before pausing them apparently at Donald Trump's behest. Peace talks are underway between the Lebanese and Israeli government, even though Lebanon is not fighting Israel. The result is an atmosphere of unreality, of bewildering and surreal conditions. I have again and again in my travels across the country. It was there on Beirut's famed Corniche by the glittering Mediterranean, where shirtless men played hard-fought games of paddle. A young woman in hijabs looked on, puffing away on fragrant shisha pipes. The roar of military aircraft and the low buzz of drones drowned out the gentle lapping of the sea. Less than a mile away, just beyond a marina, bobbing with the gleaming yachts, hundreds of displaced people huddled to make shift tents. They are the residents of border villages and suburban apartment blocks and have been reduced to rubble by Israeli air and drone strikes in the past 3 months. A mere handful of the more than 1.1 million Lebanese forced to flee their homes. In the south, makeshift grave sites dot the cities, their slapdash nature testifying to a stubborn vow to rebuild the ancient villages raised by Israeli troops. Let me repeat that article. 1.1 million folks have been asked to move. An editorial comment, I think, if a person moves from one house to another, look how trying that is to just move all the furniture. Now we're saying you're out of your home living in a tent. Those who are displaced run because of evacuation orders that arrive on social media from the Israeli army, Arabic spokesman. These orders have their own surreal quality, a foreign military operating inside the territory of another nation declares that in light of the terrorist Hezbollah's violation of the ceasefire agreement, the Defense Army is compelled to act against it hopefully. These messages elide who exactly this Defense Army is defending. The regional situation has never been so fertile. Each day brings news that seems to append the news of the day. The war in Iran is ending or escalating or both. Everyone, meanwhile, seems to be learning the hard lessons that only war can teach. Iran's proxies did not protect it from Americans attacked. Israel's maximum force doctrine has particularly produced more resistance. America's power was shown to stop short at the Strait of Hormuz. Nobody knows what comes next. Yet, what struck me over the course of a week in Lebanon in mid-May is how united so many Lebanese seem in their exhaustion. Whatever their creed, they can no longer stomach it being in the crosshair of foreign powers. Instead, there appeared to be a tentative consensus emerging, even among those likely to blame Hezbollah for the country's woes, that the people of Lebanon must find a way to share political and economic power. It was a hope, muted and precarious, that in place of absurdity and surrealism could come clarity and realism. Elias Jared typifies the changing mindset. An Orthodox Christian member of parliament from southern Lebanon, Jared defeated a Hezbollah politician in 2022. As part of a list of candidates seeking to break down sectarian divides. If he might once again have been sympathetic to Israel's fight against Hezbollah, that changed after Israel used booby-trap pagers to attack Hezbollah leaders. 2 years ago, Jared, an eye surgeon, was horrified by the gruesome injuries he saw in civilian patients and disgusted by Israelis' celebratory response to the attack, which injured thousands. They congratulate Netanyahu for what he has done, Jared told me. Let them come see the children, the elderly, and were blinded by these pagers. How come you are congratulating them? You know what the impact will be. There will be two crimes that happen at the same time. The pager attack and the silent attitude of the whole world. For Jared, the atrocity puts Hezbollah and Israel side by side as terrorists of innocent civilians. Tarek Merrick, an Orthodox Christian politician who served as the deputy prime minister, also seemed keen to move past old divisions. He told me if the efforts to portray Hezbollah as simply a tool of Iran with no legitimacy in Lebanon will backfire. Hezbollah had a major role, in driving the Israelis out of the south, he told me, referring to Israel withdrawn from Lebanon in 2000 after nearly 2 decades of occupation. They were hailed to Lebanon, not just among the Shiite community, but among all of us. Hezbollah's popularity certainly waned with among Shiites. When the group decided to join Hamas in targeting Israel on October 7th, and again after the killing of Ali Khamenei this year, but the ferocity and indiscriminate nature of Israeli assault have revived Hezbollah's image as a protector of Lebanese sovereignty for all its deep ties to Iran. Editorial comment when we read these articles, it's so like all these folks are playing like a chess game. You know, whether it's Hezbollah or Hamas or Israel or the Palestinians, but we're dealing with people. It's not a game, but it almost seems like it's played a game. I think we missed an opportunity in the year 2000 of restoring the full sovereignty of the state, Mitri said. From there on, Israel incursions into Lebanese territory or Hezbollah operations into Israel have given other pretexts to interfere. There is simply no military reunion to the problem of Hezbollah, he told me. Instead, he said its resolution will inevitably involve not just Iran and Israel, but other major players in the region. Lebanon cannot be extracted from the conflict with Israel unless there is a regional peace achieved. A couple days later, I traveled to the region hardest hit by the conflict, the Shiite heartland of southern Lebanon. On my way south, I stopped in to visit a member of parliament named Halima Kankour in her agricultural village of Basar, in a sprawling compound perched high above the sea. She made me a lunch of traditional Lebanese flatbreads, topped with ground lamb and za'atar, homemade cheese from a family dairy, and freshly chopped tomatoes and herbs green in a nearby garden. My ancestors used to do this, and now the new generations, they do not want to work like that, she said, stoking the glowing embers inside a wood-burning oven. We are struggling to keep it alive. This is not the only thing Kankour, a professor of international law and a Sunni Muslim, hopes to preserve. She has dedicated her life to the dream of pluralistic, secular, and united Lebanon. She was first elected in 2022, pledging to bring secularism, feminism, and an emphasis on human rights to Lebanese politics. She had long been critical of Hezbollah, but like the deputy prime minister, rejects attempts to paint it as an alien force bent on destroying Israel. Her focus instead was on Israel. Israel tells us that it's going to transform Lebanon to Gaza. It's going to occupy our land, destroy our land, she said, referring to the approach laid out by officials, including Israel's defense minister. Under international law, the threat of violence, not only the violence, is a crime itself. Israel's right to self-defense cannot come to the expense of Lebanese civilian lives, she argued. And killing a handful of Hezbollah fighters cannot justify the occupation and destruction of vast tracts of foreign country. I left Concourse home driving toward the coast in the south, crossing a half-destroyed bridge over the Liani River that demarked the most active zone of Israeli military strikes. Turning off the busy North Coast Highway, I head inland towards Nablus, a city nestled among rocky hillsides that Israel strikes had pummeled for weeks despite the ceasefire. Suddenly, I was in the only car on the road, speeding past shuttered storefronts, ghostly piles of rubble. Almost everyone had left, heeding Israel's evacuation orders. About a week after my visit to Nablus, strikes in the area intensified as Israeli approaches appeared to encircling the city. Among the many buildings leveled was the headquarters of Datuk's ambulance team. In theory, the Lebanese army should be in control of this terrain, but is unfunded and unequipped. Partly this result of Lebanon's own symbolic economic situation. Editorial comments, it's just as we felt and still feel sorry for the people of Gaza, now it's Lebanon's turn. You are listening, have been listening to a reading of articles and features from Sunday's June 7th issue of the New York Times Opinion section. We read from the New York Times Opinion section every Sunday at 2 p.m. Your reader has been Dick Shanley, and thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section, followed at 4 by a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Please stay for these readings and more throughout the day, and feel free to contact us with your comments, suggestions, with any questions you may have. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which